At precisely 6 o'clock on Christmas Day, my cellular device was inundated with 23 incoming transmissions in a span of less than 10 minutes. I ascertained this fact by meticulously recounting them at a later juncture. At that precise moment, I was seated adjacent to a window, cradling a warm mug of coffee and observing the gentle descent of fresh snow across a tranquil Vermont hillside. The sole auditory elements within the rustic dwelling were the gentle crackling of the hearth and the rhythmic snoring of my canine companion beside me. Then my phone illuminated. A single call, followed by another, and then three more in rapid succession. A deluge of text messages ensued with such alacrity that the screen seemed perpetually in motion. My former spouse, my son, my daughter, all attempting to connect with me simultaneously. The peculiar aspect was not that they were reaching out. The true oddity lay in my foreknowledge of precisely when these calls would commence. I had spent years bearing the brunt of blame for everything, even though I was the one footing the financial burden. I had dedicated years to appeasing others, only to become the very individual they most frequently criticized. For 15 consecutive Christmases, I financed every festive gathering my family decreed. The lodges, the sustenance, the presents, and all the superfluous expenses that nobody recalls until the statements arrive. Yet, inexplicably, I was invariably the source of the problem. This Christmas, I resolved to alter one aspect. In essence, I decided to cease performing one particular action. And at 6 o'clock that evening, the ramifications of this decision finally manifested. But the events that unfolded at 6 o'clock had their origins months prior and utterly escaped everyone's notice. My ex-wife, Patricia, and I finalized our divorce nearly 16 years ago. While our marriage dissolved, one shared ritual persisted. Christmas. When Tyler and Claire were younger, I understood the significance of preserving that tradition. I wished to spare them the ordeal of transitioning between households or feeling compelled to take sides during the holiday period. Consequently, when Patricia proposed renting a chalet in Aspen for Christmas, I concurred. The inaugural year was, in fact, quite pleasant. We spent quality time together. The children were jubilant. There were no disputes concerning schedules or custody arrangements. For a few days, everyone behaved as if they were still a cohesive family unit. At least, that was the initial impression. Over time, the Christmas excursions evolved from a focus on togetherness to a mere fulfillment of expectations. And these expectations continued to escalate. What began as a simple holiday escape gradually transformed into an elaborate production. The accommodations grew more opulent, the catering more sophisticated. The lists of desired gifts became more extensive. One year, Tyler expressed a desire for designer sneakers. The subsequent year, his wishes shifted to electronic devices, then timepieces, and subsequently, items whose names I could barely pronounce. Claire's requests were not significantly different. Each Christmas seemed to herald a new collection of costly desires. Exclusive items, unique experiences, enhanced amenities. Even Patricia had opinions on every detail. The chalet required a more advantageous vantage point. The menu necessitated a broader selection of dishes. The decorations were expected to exude an air of sophistication. Annually, another expense loomed, and each year I bore the cost, not out of any gratitude received, but because I believed maintaining harmony was worthwhile. The truly astonishing aspect was not the monetary outlay. It was the profound lack of appreciation that accompanied it. If the weather proved excessively frigid, I was made aware of it. If travel delays impacted someone's arrival, I was informed. If a restaurant reservation was not entirely satisfactory, Somehow, that also became my responsibility. I could expend thousands of dollars orchestrating the holiday they envisioned, and within mere hours, someone would invariably find grounds for complaint. Initially, I rationalized that families have disagreements. Then, I reassured myself that the children would mature. Subsequently, I told myself that the following year would be different. However, the subsequent year never deviated from the established pattern. The criticism persisted, the grievances remained, and the blame endured. Eventually, I observed a phenomenon that was increasingly difficult to disregard. No one ever inquired about my well-being. No one questioned whether I desired these excursions. No one asked about my financial capacity to accommodate another increasingly exorbitant Christmas. Their sole concern was a singular inquiry. Had everything been settled financially? That realization struck with greater force than any argument could. Gradually, I began to grasp a painful verity. They were not eager to see me. They were eager to ascertain what I was providing financially, and that truth set the stage for the Christmas that irrevocably altered everything. The most recent Christmas should have been the year when everything finally aligned perfectly. At least, that is what I told myself as I approved one payment after another. The accommodation alone represented a sum exceeding what some individuals expend on an entire holiday. Then came the provision of meals. Following that, the gifts. And finally, all the ancillary expenditures that escape casual consideration until the invoice is presented. By the time Christmas Day arrived, I had disbursed a sum slightly exceeding $8,000. And to be candid, the financial aspect did not even trouble me. My primary concern was witnessing my family derive enjoyment. For a brief period, it appeared that this might indeed occur. The chalet was breathtaking. The dining table was laden with an abundance of food. The fireplace emanated a warm glow in the background. Gift-wrapped packages were arranged beneath the tree. Everyone seemed content. For once, I harbored the hope that we might navigate the holiday without any discontent. I was mistaken. Following the evening meal, Tyler unwrapped the present for which I had spent weeks searching, a designer timepiece he had specifically requested. The instant he recognized the brand name, a smile graced his features for approximately 5 minutes. He then commenced manipulating the buttons, turning the dial, and examining the display. His expression underwent an immediate transformation. "Dad, what is wrong with this thing?" I inquired, looking over. "What do you mean?" "It has stopped functioning." I surmised it to be a straightforward matter of adjustment. Perhaps the battery required charging. It was conceivable that something had been inadvertently activated. Mundane issues, minor occurrences. However, Tyler reacted as though the watch had spontaneously combusted. "You expended all this money and could not ensure it operated correctly?" The atmosphere in the room became instantly silent. I attempted to explain that we could contact the vendor after the holiday. That suggestion only exacerbated his displeasure. Before I could utter another word, Patricia interjected into the discourse. "Frankly, Raymond, this is precisely the sort of action you tend to take." I fixed my gaze upon her. "What precisely does that imply?" She shook her head. "You invariably compromise on certain aspects." Compromise after spending thousands of dollars on a trip I never even requested. Before I could offer a reply, Claire contributed her own perspective. "It is as though you consistently find a method to mismanage things." Those words struck with more intensity than I anticipated, not due to their novelty, but rather their familiarity. I had heard variations of them for years. The distinguishing factor was that, on this particular occasion, something within me finally ceased to fabricate justifications for their behavior. As they continued their discourse, I surveyed the room, observing the plates, the glassware, the catered cuisine, the adornments, the presents under the tree. Every single element within that space had been financed by me. Yet, here I sat, feeling like an unwelcome intruder. Not a paternal figure, not a familial relation, merely an individual expected to settle the bill. The conversation shifted. The complaints subsided, and individuals resumed their jovial interactions. Wine was dispensed, music played, and the evening proceeded. However, I found myself unable to dismiss the realization that had just dawned upon me. For years, I believed I was purchasing cherished family memories. What I was truly acquiring was access, and even that came with a constant stream of criticism. Later that evening, the entire family congregated upstairs. Laughter reverberated throughout the chalet. Glasses clinked. Conversations filled the air. I remained downstairs, solitary. For the first time in years, I ceased contemplating how to enhance the subsequent Christmas. Instead, I posed a different question. What would transpire if I ceased financing it? The answer materialized almost instantaneously. The following year, they would receive precisely what they had paid for. Because once I committed to that decision, there was no turning back. By the time October arrived, I had nearly forgotten the commitment I made to myself on that Christmas night. Almost. Then, the family group chat was reanimated. Each year, it commenced in the same fashion. A few messages regarding holiday arrangements, a discussion about dates, a couple of suggestions, and before long, everyone was orchestrating a Christmas trip they had no intention of financing. The initial message originated from Patricia. She shared a link to an opulent chalet in Aspen. A few minutes later, she followed up with another transmission. Looks perfect for this year. Now, what are your thoughts? Not, can we afford this? Not even, are you interested? Merely an assumption that the established tradition would continue precisely as it always had. A few days later, Tyler began dispatching links. Designer apparel, electronic gadgets, accessories. Each message felt less like a suggestion and more akin to a retail order form. Claire joined the fray shortly thereafter. Her focus was not on gifts. She was concerned with the specifics of the catering. Could we engage the same company as last year? Could they incorporate additional dessert options? Could they upgrade the holiday menu? The discourse progressed without a single individual addressing the crucial question of who would actually be responsible for the financial obligations. Because in their minds, that question had already been unequivocally answered. Me, as always. The former version of myself would have objected. I would have engaged in arguments. I would have voiced complaints about the exorbitant costs. I would have expounded upon the unreasonableness of the escalating demands. This time, I refrained from all such actions. I neither objected nor consented. I did not engage in negotiations. I simply remained silent. Days elapsed, then weeks. Messages continued to appear in the group chat. Nobody registered my silence. Or, if they did, they interpreted it in the same manner they always had. They assumed I was managing all aspects of the arrangements. The peculiar element was that no one actually inquired. Not once. No one sent a message stating, "Raymond, are you comfortable with this?" No one asked whether I had finalized the bookings. No one verified whether the advance payments had been remitted. They did not ask because they did not deem it necessary. For 15 years, I had conditioned them to anticipate such arrangements. Now, I was witnessing that ingrained expectation functioning autonomously. As November transitioned into December, reminder emails began to arrive. The rental agency sought payment. The catering company required confirmation. Final balances were due. I perused each email, then closed it. No responses were issued. No payments were made. No explanations were provided. Concurrently, while everyone else was occupied with planning the Christmas they anticipated I would fund, I was discreetly making my own arrangements. And unlike the Aspen excursion, This reservation would indeed be financed. A week prior to Christmas, I loaded my truck, placed my dog Buster in the passenger seat, and proceeded northward. Not towards Aspen, not to a lavish mountain retreat, not to a sprawling lodge filled with complaints masquerading as familial traditions. I drove to a small township in Vermont. The chalet I secured was not remarkable by any conventional standard. It possessed a single bedroom, a stone fireplace, a modest kitchen, and a vista overlooking snow-laden hills extending into the distance. That was sufficient for me. In fact, it was more than sufficient. For the first time in years, I booked a Christmas journey based on my own desires, not the expectations of others. The inaugural day felt peculiar. I continuously anticipated something, a grievance, a demand, a last-minute complication that would invariably fall under my purview. Instead, there was only stillness, a welcome stillness, the kind that allows one to perceive the wind's whisper, the kind that permits the completion of a coffee before it cools, the kind that serves as a reminder of the sheer exhaustion that persistent criticism can engender. Buster spent the majority of his time slumbering near the hearth. My time was occupied with reading, traversing the snowy landscape, and relishing the absence of anyone soliciting my assistance to resolve their predicaments. No extravagant requests, no disputes regarding lodgings, no debates over dinner menus, no pressure, simply serenity. After a period, I experienced a surprising revelation. I did not miss the Aspen excursions in the slightest. I merely lamented the idealized concept of what I had wished those trips to be. Christmas morning dawned with a fresh blanket of snow and skies of pristine clarity. I prepared breakfast, took Buster for a stroll, and observed families in the town carrying presents through the thoroughfares. It was, without question, the most relaxed Christmas I had experienced in over a decade. However, throughout the day, I found myself repeatedly glancing at my phone, not out of concern, but because I possessed knowledge that everyone else lacked. Certain invoices had never been settled. Certain reservations had never been confirmed, and sooner or later, someone was bound to discover this oversight. Therefore, as the day unfolded peacefully around me, I found myself meticulously checking one detail repeatedly: the time, for I knew with absolute certainty when reality was scheduled to make its appearance. The Christmas afternoon could not have been more serene. Buster was comfortably sprawled before the fireplace. A fresh expanse of snow draped the hills outside. I had no immediate destination, no events to orchestrate, no individuals demanding updates. For the first time in years, I was not managing a holiday. I was genuinely experiencing one. Meanwhile, several states away, my family was undertaking their customary pilgrimage to Aspen. I was intimately familiar with their schedule. They invariably arrived in the late afternoon. They routinely checked into the chalet around 6 o'clock, and dinner was typically served shortly thereafter. For 15 years, every event had adhered to the same predictable pattern. This year, however, was destined to be different. The sole unanswered question was the duration it would take for them to comprehend this alteration. At precisely 6 o'clock, my phone vibrated to life. The initial call originated from Patricia. I observed it ring, then cease. 5 seconds later, she initiated another call. Before that call concluded, Tyler's name appeared, followed by Claire's, and then Patricia's once more. Within minutes, my screen resembled a frantic emergency beacon. Call after call, message after message, voicemail after voicemail. I gently set my coffee down and surveyed the ever-growing roster of notifications. Precisely as anticipated. The first text message from Patricia read, "Call me now." The second was no more amicable. "Where are you?" A few moments later, Tyler dispatched a message saturated with capital letters and palpable frustration. Claire's text conveyed a different tone. She sounded bewildered, then concerned, and finally outright panicked. I eventually accessed one of the voicemails. The predicament became immediately evident. The management company for the chalet had denied them entry. The final payment had never been processed. Without remittance, there was no active reservation, no keys, no access, and, consequently, no luxurious Christmas chalet. Approximately concurrently, they discovered that the catering service had canceled the holiday feast. Their deadline for the initial deposit had passed weeks earlier. No payment, no catering, no Christmas banquet awaiting them, no meticulously curated holiday experience. Nothing. Merely a parking lot, a collection of suitcases, and a stark reality that no one had foreseen. The messages grew increasingly desperate with each passing minute. Patricia sought explanations. Tyler desired someone to hold accountable. Claire craved a resolution. What struck me most profoundly was not their distress, but rather the unwavering assumption embedded in every message that I would rectify the situation. Even at this juncture, even after months of silence, even after failing to confirm a single booking, their initial instinct was not to independently resolve the problem. Their primary impulse was to contact me. For years, I had averted every holiday crisis before it could escalate into a public spectacle. This time, there was nothing to salvage, only inevitable consequences. I could have answered immediately. I could have elucidated the entire sequence of events. I could have intervened and secured an alternative chalet, another dining arrangement, a different last-minute remedy. That was precisely what the former version of myself would have done. Instead, I rose and proceeded to the kitchen. I poured myself another freshly brewed cup of coffee. Then, I returned to the window. Outside, snow continued its silent descent across the hillside. Inside, my phone persisted in vibrating on the tabletop. Calls, texts, voicemails. Calls, texts, voicemails. For once, I did not hasten to mend the situation. I simply remained seated and listened to the quiet intervals between the incoming notifications. Because, on occasion, the most potent response is no response at all. And that Christmas, at precisely 6 o'clock, conveyed everything I needed to comprehend. After nearly an hour of incessant calls and messages, I made the decision to respond. The instant I answered, Patricia commenced speaking. In truth, speaking is not an adequate descriptor. She was demanding answers. Raymond, where are you? What is transpiring? Why are we not in chalet? Before I could formulate a reply, Tyler interjected from a nearby location. This is utterly preposterous. Everyone is standing outside. The rental company states there is no active reservation. Claire's voice sounded weary. Dad, could you please explain what is happening? For a fleeting moment, I simply listened, not out of confusion, but because it was the first time all day they appeared genuinely invested in hearing from me. When the cacophony finally subsided, I posed a simple question. Did any of you make the payment for the chalet? A profound silence ensued on the line. No one responded. Consequently, I posed another question. Did any of you remit payment to the catering company? Further silence. Then Patricia spoke. That is beside the point. I nearly chuckled, as that was precisely the point. I took a sip of my coffee and delivered the only response I deemed they deserved. I assumed whoever made the reservation would have paid for it. Silence. Complete and utter silence. For the first time in years, no one had a counterargument. No one had a criticism ready to deploy. No one had an excuse, because we all understood the unvarnished truth. Not a single one of them had anticipated bearing the financial responsibility. They expected me to. I finally articulated what I should have expressed years prior. I was never ruining Christmas. No one interrupted. I was financing it. The words hung in the air for a moment. 15 years of accumulated frustration condensed into a single sentence. I elaborated on how each holiday had gradually transformed from a familial occasion into a mere fulfillment of expectations. How every year was accompanied by escalating invoices and diminishing returns of appreciation. How I had grown profoundly weary of being perceived as the problem while simultaneously underwriting everyone else's idealized holiday. The conversation concluded precisely as one might anticipate. No apologies were offered. No one admitted to being mistaken. A few acrimonious remarks were exchanged, and eventually, the call was terminated. However, despite the unfavorable conclusion of our discussion, something significant had finally been set in motion. For the first time in 15 years, the burden of responsibility no longer rested upon my shoulders. The days following Christmas were marked by a palpable quietude. Initially, the messages I received bore little distinction from the phone calls. There was palpable anger, frustration, and a few attempts to instill a sense of guilt within me. According to Tyler, I had brought embarrassment upon the family. In Patricia's estimation, I had orchestrated unnecessary drama. Claire remained largely detached from the arguments, though she occasionally reached out to ascertain my well-being. That gesture alone felt novel. For the first time in a considerable period, someone was inquiring about my state rather than requesting that I fund something. As the weeks progressed, the emotional intensity began to dissipate. The initial shock subsided, and reality finally had the space to settle in. The Aspen excursion had not unraveled due to my interference. It had collapsed because no one assumed accountability for it. That distinction held considerable weight, irrespective of their willingness to acknowledge it. The subsequent year ushered in a perceptible transformation. No one forwarded links to opulent mountain lodges. No one circulated elaborate catering menus. No one assumed I would cover every expense. The ingrained expectation had finally been dismantled. Certain relationships experienced a degree of estrangement. I will not offer a false narrative to the contrary. A few conversations became noticeably shorter. A few cherished traditions quietly faded into obscurity. However, something unanticipated also occurred. The interactions that persisted began to feel more genuine. When my children contacted me, they were not doing so out of necessity. They were calling because they genuinely wished to converse. Those conversations were not frequent, but they were authentic. And frankly, I would much rather receive one sincere phone call than 100 entitled demands. Reflecting on the past, the most exceptional Christmas of my life was not the one featuring the most expansive chalet. It was not the one adorned with the most expensive gifts. It was not the one boasting gourmet dining experiences or breathtaking panoramic views. This was a tranquil Christmas in Vermont, the kind shared with a slumbering canine companion, a crackling hearth, and an untroubled spirit. It was a Christmas free from the day-long pursuit of validation, a time when no one could hold me accountable for every minor setback. While many equate generosity with an unending stream of affirmative responses, I've come to understand that genuine generosity also necessitates establishing limits. This is because when acts of goodwill transform into entitlements, appreciation frequently vanishes. Consequently, occasionally the most beneficial action one can take is to withdraw and allow others to shoulder burdens that were never rightfully theirs to bear. 6 o'clock did not mar the Christmas festivities. It merely illuminated those who perceive Christmas as a personal possession. Was Raymond wrong to stop paying for Christmas? Or was 15 years of silence the only way to make his family see what they had taken for granted? Tell me what you think in the comments below. If this story made you think, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We post new family dramas every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next.